Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Truth Mjumbe. I am a freshman sociology major from Princeton, New Jersey. I am attending Morehouse College. I'm here on behalf of the Morehouse Center for Excellence in Education, where we aim to build a new pipeline of educators through the 5 elite pathways, which are explore, lead, innovate, teach, and this week, engage. The Engage pathway exposes students to the many ways education intersects with multiple sectors, industries, and diverse audiences, and introduces students to the social change principles that lead to healthy and equitable outcomes in schools and in organizations. The center is led by our director, Dr. Nina Gilbert, and Ms. Briette Toussaint, our senior academic support specialist. I would like to turn over now to my fellow honor scholars, Horace Ryans III and Dorian Watkins, to introduce our program for this evening.
My name is Dorian Watkins, senior business marketing major from Atlanta, Georgia.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Horace Ryans III. I'm a freshman sociology major, leadership studies minor from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
And today our guest speaker is the Reverend Lukata Mjumbe. He is a veteran grassroots community organizer, public policy advocate, interfaith leader, and dynamic community pastor. It is from his church platform. He preaches and ministers to an expanding community in a diversity of ways. He is a founding member of the Black Alliance for Peace and an advocate for racial and environmental justice, the protection of immigrants, cooperative economics, and the development of public policy strategies to abolish the system of mass incarceration. Pastor Mjumbe seeks to explore and challenge the intersection of multiple forms of oppression. As a spiritual and community leader, he is called to bring together people of diverse traditions who are deeply committed to freedom and justice. Reverend Mjumbe graduated with the highest honors from both the Morehouse College Political Science Department and the Princeton Theological Religion and Society program.
Greetings, Reverend Mjumbe. How are you doing today, man?
I'm well. How are you?
I am pretty well. I actually give you, a little bit of your son was actually supposed to be my roommate this semester. So it is a pleasure to be introduced to his father because he is an exceptional young man. And as a Morehouse alum, we, as we looked into you and as Truth told us more about you, you didn't have a traditional journey through Morehouse, is what the stories he tells us. So can you briefly explain to us what your journey was and how it led you to the position you are today?
Well, again, Horace and Dorian and all who have been involved with the Morehouse Center for Excellence Education, all of you all who are connected with the Bonner Scholars Program, it is a blessing, an honor, and a privilege in order to be here with you tonight and to share with you. When we talk about the traditional pathway, or the traditional journey through Morehouse, in some ways, I think it's important for us to interrogate the word traditional. In many ways, I had a non-traditional pathway. I came to Morehouse out of high school, was blessed and excited to be there, came into the honors program, came to Morehouse from Prince George's County, Maryland, where I graduated from high school, came in as a political science major, worked really hard, was involved in a lot of different campus organizations and in the community at large, was a resident assistant my sophomore year, was an RA my sophomore year in Du Bois Hall, and worked really hard as I tried to be both a student and a community organizer and activist. And there's a lot of details within my journey within Morehouse, but ultimately, big picture, I was one of those many students at Morehouse that struggled financially. I did not have everything that I needed in order to make it from one semester to the next. I came in as on a full tuition scholarship, but tuition went up every year. And my scholarship didn't. you Bonner scholars are blessed in a different kind of way than some of us were in terms of how the scholarship program worked. And so ultimately, by the time I got to the middle of my senior year, I ran out of money. Did not have enough money to pay off my balance from the previous semester and to put down what I needed to put down for my final semester. And so I had to make a choice to drop out of Morehouse, to commit myself more fully and completely to the community activism and organizing work that I had become connected to deeply around the Persian Gulf War early in maybe 1990, 1991, but became even more intense in my activism in 1992 around the Rodney King rebellion and the uprising that touched not only Los Angeles, but it also touched Atlanta and all over the world. And so in the winter of 1992, in December of 1992, I had to drop out of college. But I wanted to be a Morehouse man. I'd been a man of Morehouse for 3.5 years, and I was committed to being a Morehouse man graduate of the college that I loved. And so though I continued to study and continued to even try to take coursework at Georgia State and other areas, I continued to save. And many of the communities that I worked with and worked within also wanted me to be able to return, to come to Morehouse and to finish my education there. So ultimately, in the summer of 1999, I was able to save enough money to pay off the balance that I had to Morehouse, to get money and loans so I could put the money down in order to get into the next semester. The tuition continued to go up every year during the years that I was away, and finally was able to graduate in May of 2000. So just in terms of the length of my journey itself, it was 11 years for me, from 1989 when I entered to 2000 when I ultimately graduated. So in that way, it was certainly non-traditional, if it was traditional, to be a 4-year student. I'm happy to see, at least from the reports that I have, that the college is working very hard, so more students are able to move forward and to finish in 4 years. But and I've even been happy to see how some of the rhetoric has changed. I mean, when I came in 1989, and I understand they don't say this to you all anymore, and you all have been in the online sort of platform for some of you. I know, Dorian, you're a senior, but I don't know if they said to you, but they said to me in 1989, look to your left, look to your right. One of the people that's next to you won't be there anymore. And a lot of that was because of money. And we knew that financially we weren't going to be able to make it all the way through. We had enough to get there for the first year, but many people did not have enough to make it through. And so in that way, there were many people, though it may be deemed non-traditional in terms of the length of time, that never made it through all 4 years of Morehouse. What perhaps was most non-traditional is that I decided, even if it took me 11 years, I was going to come back and I was going to finish and earn my degree from Morehouse. And I graduated in the class of 2000. And there was a lot that happened in between there that I think when we talk about this theme of engagement this week, that we can talk more about in terms of what happened during my time on campus, as a student, during my time when I was still in Atlanta, living in the Vine City community, not far from Morehouse and Clark Atlanta University, and how the education that I received in Atlanta was not contained within the classroom, but also was deeply supplemented and in some ways comprehensively enriched through my community engagement experiences.
So we know that you majored in political science. How did you transition to becoming a pastor?
Well, it's not an uncommon transition for a lot of our students. There were a number of people who were my classmates in the political science department who are some of our well-known religious leaders that we find in the community today. If you think about Reverend Jamal Bryant, Jamal was in my original class, the class of 1993, was a political science, international relations major, I believe. You had, and he is there now in Atlanta, pastoring a major church in Atlanta. You had folks like Mike Walrand, who I believe was in the political science department, who was at First Corinthian in New York. You had brothers like Jonathan Walton, who was the former dean of the Harvard Divinity Chapel, Harvard Divinity School Chapel at Harvard University. So I mean, there's been a wide range of individuals who have seen a linkage between the study of the science of politics and the study of government and political science and accepting a call to ministry and within the church. It was a long road for me, I'll say. I was not one of the traditional folks who saw myself as a politician / preacher when I was at Morehouse. I was not a chapel assistant. I was not I was not involved in any real religious activity. I think that I went to church when we were required to go on for Crown Forum. That was the broadest extent of my church activity. I think I went to church on Sunday morning one time the entire 11 years that I was in Atlanta, and that was at around the corner in West End at the Shrine of the Black Madonna church. I don't know if you all know that church. It's right in West End. You should know it, but it's but the only reason that I went is because there was a woman who I was trying to date at Clark Atlanta University that went to church there, and she said the only way she would go out with me is if I went to church with her. So I went to church that Sunday. It was a communion Sunday. I remember that, but I don't remember much else about it. And so my journey to the ministry, though, came years later. I was an activist and I was an organizer. As soon as I graduated from Morehouse, I moved to Sumter County, Alabama, and became the director of the Rural Training and Research Center of the Federation of Southern Cooperatives Land Assistance Fund that works on behalf of Black farmers and rural Black communities, helping them to organize for self-determination, to create credit unions, to build cooperative economics, to fight against racism. I had been an environmental justice activist and organizer. I had worked around civil rights and human rights and the death penalty. I had worked against poverty with anti-poverty organizations in Georgia. Even after I dropped out of Morehouse, we even started a political party called the Black Power Party, and POWER was an acronym for People Organized to Win Empowering Representation. And this grew out of a student organization, the Students for African American Empowerment, which was born on the Morehouse College campus, born in the Atlanta University Center. One of our founders was Otis Moss III, one of the founding members of Students for African American Empowerment. And so when I began to do a lot of my organizing and activist work, I came to be very focused and very good at identifying what I was against. And that was valuable for a time because I was laser sharp. I mean, I was anti-racist, I was anti-classist, I was anti-sexist, I was anti-imperialist. I knew what I was against. I knew who our enemy was and is, and I had prepared myself to fight against all of those things that were hurting our people. But I reached a point where I realized that if you're just focused on what you're against, you eventually burn out. You have to know what you're for. You have to know what you're trying to replace this thing you're trying to tear, the thing you're trying to tear down. You want to deconstruct some things, but you also have to be able to construct some things. And really, while I was working with Black farmers in rural Alabama, I met some of my first organic and authentic grassroots theologians and Black farmers that may not have had a lot of education, but they knew the Bible much better than I did. They knew the Bible much better than a lot of the religious scholars that I later came to find at Princeton Theological Seminary and some of the greatest theological institutions in the world. They knew their Bible and they understood it and it was real, and they could apply parables and scriptures to what they were experiencing and what they were doing, even as they planted seeds in the ground and worked to bear fruit that would last. And so they trained me and they taught me and they kept working on me, and I was resistant. I'm like, I'm a revolutionary, I'm an activist, I'm an organizer, I'm fighting. My fist is clenched up. And they said, well, you can clench it up sometimes, but you also got to be able to open it up too. And so it took a while in this transition from political science to ministry in the church, but ultimately I had a come to Jesus moment. You know, it really took a lot of convincing. It took a lot of Black farmer theology. It took a lot of listening and experiences, but I also just had some life changes and some health circumstances. And I thought that I could lean on all of my political understanding. And I was in a hospital bed. I was in a hospital bed, and I had been diagnosed with a neurological issue that was going to require emergency brain surgery, where they said I had bleeding at the pool. At the bottom of my brain, there was a pool of blood, and they needed to do an emergency surgery. And if they did the surgery, because of where it was located, I had a very low chance of survival. And and I panicked, and I started crying out to anything and everything. And I started with the political thinkers and the philosophers and the ideologues about what they would say if they were faced with the prospect of death. And I didn't get anything back. I got more anxiety. And then I had studied all of these other religions while I was in Atlanta. And, there's a lot going on in Atlanta. You can find any different religious community you want to find within a stone's throw of the Atlanta University Center. And I had interacted with all of them. So I started praying in Arabic and Hebrew and Bismillah, Rahman Rahim, and Bereshit Bara. I mean, I was doing all of my different languages. I was calling on African traditional languages, chanting Oshun, Ogun, Yemeya. I was doing Buddhist chants like Tina Turner did on What's Love Got to Do with It. I was saying, Tupac, can you help me? I see death around the corner. Nothing worked. And so finally, as a last resort, I said, all right, Jesus, can you help a brother out? I didn't quite say it with those nice words, but and Jesus said, okay. And, and with that, it began my pathway to know that there was something greater than what it was that I was able to learn at Morehouse, and I was able to learn through all my political experiences. And ultimately, what I came to understand is that my work in the church and my relationship with Christ and my transition to becoming a pastor really helped me to more fully discover not only what I was against, because I'm still clear about that, but now also what it is that I'm for. And that in many ways has represented fulfillment of the studies that I began really before I came to Morehouse as a student in high school, and was an activist then, but certainly reached the highest point, and it was sharpened best by so many great brothers at Morehouse and sisters who were at Spelman and Clark Atlanta University, and then at the time Morris Brown, that helped me to discover who it is that I was called to be.
Thank you. I just want to apologize. I mispronounced your last name as well. It's Mjumbe, right?
Mjumbe. Yes, sir.
Mjumbe. Okay.
I've been called a lot worse, Brother Dorian. It's okay.
Okay.
I just really want to say thank you for that answer. It was so well articulated, and it kind of lays out a path for leading into our next question. So in that period of time, those 11 years where you weren't at Morehouse, you continuously reference how you were involved in the community around Atlanta and around the AUC, and how that's kind of like that's guided your life in a sense. And so my question now is, leading up to now, recently you've participated in numerous community engagement events in Princeton. And what were some events that you felt like impacted you the most, and why? So I guess in this current space.
Well, right now, and this has been characteristic, I think, of most of my life, particularly since I found out not only what I was against, but what I was for. There's always been an integration of my spiritual work and my political work. I have a commitment to try to spiritualize political places and politicize spiritual places. And that has led me to be involved in a wide range of community engagement activities, whether that be working against violence within the capital of New Jersey is the city of Trenton. Even right now, we have record high numbers of murders within the city. It's the capital city, but it's a small city. It sits on about 7.5 square miles, maybe 85,000 people, but we've had 35 murders. If you look at it per capita, we've had more murders in Trenton than they have in places like they get the headlines like Chicago or South Central LA. I mean, this is a serious issue. And so that certainly, that level of engagement and not just the marching and the protesting, which is an important part of it, and it's something that I know that we need to do. Mobilization is very important, but organization must follow. If it doesn't proceed, it must follow mobilization. Mobilization is when you get all the people to come out. Organization is when you help them to be able to work for themselves, so you don't have the same situations that required for all the people to come out in the first place. And organization is how you respond, not just react. Mobilizations are oftentimes the reaction. Organization is the response. And and let me just say as an aside, it's the reason, one of the reasons why I'm so proud of what you all are doing in the Bonner Scholars Program and being service scholars, that Morehouse is intentionally having you being a part of efforts to organize programmatically around different crises that are facing our community. I remember when the Bonner Scholar Program was started. It started when I was at Morehouse, and I remember some of the first Bonner Scholars, and I even remember some of the leaders of the Bonner Scholar Program, which coincidentally came from Princeton, New Jersey, where I live now and where my church is now. Were there during the Rodney King Rebellion in 1992 that I mentioned previously. But in terms of the right now, that engagement that goes around organization has been critical. And what I have done is, when there have been murders and when there have been there's been violence within our communities, I've gone to the places where people have been shot or stabbed and killed within 24 hours, and I prayed at the spot where those persons have died. And my son, Trutham Mjumbe, who's a Bonner Scholar, I remember when he was younger, 14, he was 14, 15 years old, I was taking him with me to go to those places and to sometimes see the blood still on the ground. And but not only just to pray, but also to pray with open eyes, because sometimes when you're in certain spaces, it's not the wisest thing to do for you to close your eyes and bow your head. You need to pray with your eyes wide open and look around, because the same people who were responsible for the violence that occurred 24 hours previously may still be present. But when I kept my eyes open, I also saw people who were the family members and the loved ones of the victims. And so I would go to them and find out where they lived and go and pray with them and help them to find resources so they could bury their son or their daughter, so they could get support, whether that be for counseling, trauma counseling, or grief counseling, to help them to push and to advocate for justice, so that we would find out who was responsible, but also to challenge the system that was responsible for cultivating violence and conflict within our community. I would also sometimes engage and come in contact with those who were connected to the victimizers themselves, and to pray with and for them, and to challenge them, and to seek to connect them to a different kind of pathway that could lead to different results than what had occurred with the tragic departure of yet another member of our community. So working around violence and the destruction of our communities has been critical. In recent times, I'll say, particularly over the course of the last 7 to 8 months, as we have seen the reemergence of the Black Lives Matter movement. I was directly involved back in 2013-14 when it first surfaced, and then more recently as we marched and protested and demonstrated around Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and so many others whose lives have been taken away. And it's been inspiring to me to see the people of your generation, of younger people, taking responsibility for organizing and mobilizing. There's was a great Martinican psychiatrist who was involved with the Algerian Revolution. His name was Frantz Fanon. I don't know if you all have studied him yet at Morehouse. I didn't actually study him until I connected with some of the revolutionaries who were outside of the campus community that directed me towards Frantz Fanon. But he wrote a book called Wretched of the Earth. And in Wretched of the Earth, Fanon says that each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its own mission, fulfill it, or betray it. And I feel that my generation had to try to figure its way out and figure out what we were supposed to do and how we were supposed to do it. And I'm proud to see some of the legacy. Stacey Abrams was also one of the founders of Students for African American Empowerment. And I remember, and we burned the Georgia state flag together on the steps of the Georgia Capitol back in 1992. I'm proud to see some of her work around voter registration in the state of Georgia and what that may yield in terms of having even greater impacts on political elections. And so, but I'm even more proud to see another generation of young people who are picking this up and are chanting some of the same chants, but have some of their own chants. You know, I mean, we had Public Enemy and Tupac and NWA, and now when I hear, you know, "We Gonna Be All Right" by Kendrick Lamar being chanted, when I see people taking their own culture and their own traditions and their own value and their own rhythm and their own swag and bringing that into a movement, I mean, that is encouraging. And so I've seen that as I have tried to be supportive of young people who have been organizing around the Black Lives Matter movement over the course of the last several months. And I will continue to do that. So it's all a part of one continuous stream, though, for me, a continuous trajectory that certainly there are things that are recent, but you know, past is prologue. And I have not given up on the things that I was committed to when I was at Morehouse, you know, more than 25 years ago, and the things that I organized around when I was at Morehouse. And so I am excited to see this next generation, and you know, I think that I am continuing to be impacted and shaped. As much as I say I want to encourage and support, I'm a lifelong learner, and I continue to learn things every day. And I would never know how to mobilize 3,000 people, you know, in 5 hours over Twitter, you know, or over Instagram. We didn't have Twitter. We didn't have Facebook. We didn't have Instagram. We didn't have any of these technological platforms. And for us to be able to get 3,000 people, it required a different level of activity. We were doing flyers and putting things, you know, flyers do nothing now, you know, but you all can mobilize thousands of people with a few keystrokes. And so that's been encouraging to see that there are new methodologies being employed as well.
Thank you for that response. So now with our next question, as a pastor, how do you engage with college students, and how is that different from the ways you engage with them as a professor?
I don't know. It's really all of that different. I mean, I teach at Mercer County Community College, which is a community college here in Princeton, New Jersey. And as much as I love and I support our, Morehouse in particular and HBCUs in general, I know that the vast number of African American students that actually are blessed to be able to go to college or are enrolled in college right now are in community colleges or in 2-year programs. And so I have committed myself to be a teacher. I teach a college success course. I teach a course on college success and personal wellness, trying to help people to transition to the college classroom. Oftentimes, our high schools do not prepare us especially well to be able to do especially well once we start college. And so I focus on teaching. There's also a number of older people who come back to school and they may start at a 2-year college at a community college. And so I try to teach both as a professor at the college level and as a pastor at the church level. I try to teach in a language that is right down to earth and easily understood. I have no need to speak above people or down to people. Yeah, I went to Morehouse College, and I know they say you can always tell a Morehouse man, but you can't tell him anything. You can tell me some things. I'm still learning. I'm still figuring it out. Yes, I went to Ivy League Seminary, Princeton Theological Seminary, earned 2 degrees there, graduated at the top of my class in both programs. Yet I know that those who, as I said before, who taught me, my first theologians were people who did not even have high school diplomas. And so I try to take everything that I have learned and to be able to break it right down in a language that is easily understood, to make it digestible, to make it relevant, to make it impactful, and to connect it to something bigger. That's my methodology as a teacher in both the church and in the academic classroom. That education comes from Latin root words that mean to bring out, to pull out. And so what the best educator will do will be to bring out what's already in somebody and help to put it in front of them and to connect it to other things. And I'm always convinced that there is more knowledge and wisdom and understanding on the other side of the lectern that I may stand behind, or the pulpit that I may stand within. There's more knowledge and wisdom and understanding in that classroom. There's more knowledge and wisdom and understanding in the pews than exists within my head and within my mind and within my experience. And so I try to draw out, to pull out the knowledge and wisdom and understanding that is within the listener and connect that with the things that I know and point it to some things that we're trying to understand more deeply so that we all are transformed in the learning experience. So I wouldn't say that I would say there's a fundamental difference in terms of my engagement with college students, but I know that you have to listen as well. It's one thing to, people say, well, can you talk the talk? Can you walk the walk? Can you listen to what needs to be heard? And you know, the gift and the skill of being attentional and intentional in your listening is a very important part of the learning process. It's one thing to pay attention, so I know I know that you're speaking, or even to pay attention so I can regurgitate and repeat back what it is that you said. But it's something else for me to listen intentionally, saying, so what did you mean? What did you intend when you said that? Or what was the reason for the silence when you didn't say what it is that you said? And what is my motivation as I listen? Do I have a motivation? You know, why am I sitting here? And I encourage that for people in the classroom. I say, this is for you. You have enrolled in this class. You have decided to come into this church. It is your responsibility to recognize that there's something here that I came here to get. I do not want to waste my time, waste my energy, or in the case of when we're paying for school, waste my money or my parents' money. And I'm going to get the bag. I'm going to get what I came for. I'm not going to leave out of here not getting what I came for. And you need to challenge your professors and challenge those who are teaching you. Say, look, bro, you know, I appreciate you here. I know we all got a job to do, but my job is to get what I need. And so what do I need to do so I get what I came for? And so as a teacher, I try to figure out, well, why are you here? What did you come for? And see if we can find ourselves on the same page and we can connect so I can give you what you came to get and you can receive what I came to give.
Gotcha. So I guess you could say the message from that is that closed mouths don't get fed.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, you know, I say to my son, and I want to encourage you all, you know, if you're, and I know it's different and it's challenging in terms of the online classroom situation, but when your college professors have office hours, take the time to go and visit with them and have a conversation with them. Not just when you have a problem, not just when you're trying to get a C turned to a B or a B turned to an A. You know, can you imagine what if right now that some of your professors 30 years from now, 20 years from now, you're going to realize that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King or Benjamin Elijah Mays is your teacher. And you didn't even know. And all you and your children gonna ask you, well, Daddy, did you go to class every day? Yeah, I went to class. Well, did you ever go and sit down and meet with him? No, I never did. Well, why didn't you? He had office hours, didn't he? Yeah, but I was over on Spelman's campus, or I was playing video games, or I was doing something else. No, open your mouth, say what you need, and open your ears. So open mouths don't, closed mouths don't get fed, but closed ears don't get, and closed minds don't get fed either. And so you have to open up your ears and open up your mind to receive some of what it is that your professors and your administrators and your leaders and even your classmates. I learned so much from my brothers and sisters who were on my hallway, who lived in my dorm, who were on campus. And again, the people who are making real changes in the world today are people who I saw, who I talked with, who I had relationships with, and who I've maintained relationships with even today.
Very, very impactful. That point on closed mouths don't get fed, and neither closed minds and closed ears don't get fed either. So I think a very great point that needs to be elaborated on sometimes, because we can listen attentively, but intentionally is really where it matters. So I really like that you pointed that out in your entire answer to that question. So on the same lines of that, when we are opening our minds and having to be intentional with our listening, this is a very loaded question, so I ask that you bear with me. But the question is: the South and the Black church in particular was instrumental in driving civil rights reforms during the 50s and the 60s through civil disobedience. How do we think critically around mobilizing to create change? And do you feel that past models still work, or are there some adaptations and development that needs to take place for protesting to meet the current moment?
My answer is yes. and it's both and not either or. Certainly that past models can still work in certain times, in certain places, in certain situations, in certain contexts. Be very clear. Past models didn't work all the time in the past either. We can talk about the tradition of civil disobedience, and I remember when I decided that I was never going to be civil disobedient again, and it was in 1992, and we were following the tradition of what had happened in the 1960s in the civil rights movement, and people were humming "We Shall Overcome," and we put our hands up, and we were marching off of Morehouse's campus. We were trying to march towards downtown Atlanta. And we found ourselves, and it's no longer there now. It used to be John Hope Homes. I think University Homes is still there next to the Morehouse campus. Horace, you may not know that because you haven't been down there yet. But the housing project that's right on the backside of Spelman, Doreen, you may be familiar with. I think University Homes, but it used to be another one that was called John Hope Homes. And so we were trying to march, trying to do a mass mobilization going to downtown Atlanta, and we put our hands up and we sway and "We shall overcome," and we said that. And the police had their riot shields, and they took out the billy clubs and started jabbing us and hitting us. And I thought I had broken a rib. I ended up getting arrested. They tear gassed the campus. They shot tear gas into some of the dormitories on Clark Atlanta University's campus. I saw one of my professors, Dr. Tobe Johnson, pass out. He was the chairman of the political science department from the tear gas that had been fired onto the campus. And I said, okay, that's it. That's the last time for me. I encourage you if you want to do that, but everybody cannot do that. In terms of, I will continue to organize and continue to march, but it takes a stronger person than me to willingly allow themselves to get beat down by the police. And even my mother back in the 1960s was connected with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and she, known as SNCC, that John Lewis was a part of, and that Stokely Carmichael later came to be called Kwame Ture, and Diane Nash, and Willie Ricks, Brother Africa. You may have seen him on campus at Morehouse, and Mukasa Willie Ricks. So she was a part of a training for nonviolent direct action and resistance. And you had to go through these scenarios where they would have you, like you were doing a sit-in, and then people would come in and yell at you and scream at you and push you and hit you, and somebody spit on my mother, and maybe a piece of the spit fell on her lip, and she just snapped. She couldn't take it. She got up, she grabbed the chair. They're like, all right, so you're not going to participate in the nonviolent direct action. You'll work the phones, so when other people get arrested, you'll be the one to get them out of jail. And maybe I got some of that from her in terms of the way that I organize is I can use, and I've done it before, tactically, the mobilization of nonviolent civil disobedience, but I also believe in a fundamental human right to self-defense. I also believe, and again, I've seen some of our younger brothers and sisters today that have a different way of thinking, and I say there's a, I say the Bible says, it says there's a time and a season for everything under the sun. There's a time to love, there's a time to hate, there's a time to kill, there's a time to die, there's a time to laugh, and there's a time to stop laughing. It says there's a time to hug, and there's a time to refrain from hugging. So you got to know what time it is. Is it time for you to do this tactically, strategically? Is this what's going to work? Or is it time for you to say, no, we're not going to do that? And we should always understand in the 60s, there were multiple traditions. Yes, you had SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Yes, you had the Congress of Racial Equality, but you also had the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. You also had the Revolutionary Action Movement. You also had other organizations that were working in tension and in tandem, and sometimes certain gains and accomplishments were made by those who were using certain strategies because they didn't want to have to deal with others who were going to use other strategies. When Malcolm X came to Selma, this was after he left the Nation of Islam. Malcolm X said, look, give Dr. King what it is he's asking for. Because if you don't give Dr. King what it is that he's asking for, you're going to have to deal with me. And you're not prepared to give me what I'm asking for, and I'm not prepared to ask you for it. I'm going to take it. So, these movements and these strategies can work together. And so past models can still work, but they've always only worked based in certain times, places, and context. And so you can't just do something as a romantic sort of throwback like we were doing. We were doing We Shall Overcome because we were taught, we had watched Eyes on the Prize, and that's what we thought that we were supposed to do. And well, at least a lot of us did. And so, but that strategy is not always the best strategy. And sometimes you have to use boycotts. Sometimes you use direct actions. Sometimes you do use letter writing campaigns. Sometimes you use elections. Sometimes you use public policy advocacy. Sometimes you build cooperatives and credit unions and community centers. Sometimes you go into schools and you do mentorship programs. There's all kinds of different ways. So never get caught up in thinking that there's one way. They don't oppress us in one way. It's more complicated than that. If they only oppressed us in one way, we would have been free. We would have been free before Nat Turner and the slave uprisings, before Denmark Vesey and Gabriel Prosser. If it was that simple, it's not that simple. It's complicated, it's sophisticated, and we have to be strategic and tactic and principled and recognize that we all have a different role and a different part to play. I may do certain things as a pastor and from the pulpit. You may do certain things as a student. Others may do certain things in politics. Others may do certain things in business. The goal is to continue to teach and to learn the principles that are guiding us so that we can be in unity in terms of our goals, our activities, and our action plans may not be the same. They will be diverse. They will be differentiated. But our goals need to be connected, and that's what we need. Sometimes we get caught up on critiquing people, say, "Oh, I don't disagree with that because I won't do that." But Malcolm X said it well. Malcolm X said, if freedom is your highest value, you don't go around saying what you won't do in order to get free. If freedom is your highest, now maybe it's something else. Maybe it's getting your money is the highest value. So then you won't do anything that's going to compromise your money. Maybe obeying the law is your highest value. So you won't do anything that would cause you to be civil disobedient and break the law. But if freedom is your highest value, then there's nothing that you won't do. Doesn't mean you have to do everything. But the phrase is by any means what? Necessary.
Necessary.
Right. By any means necessary. Not by any means, period, full stop. By any means that is necessary. So what's necessary for Dorian might not be the same for Horace. And what's necessary for Horace may not be the same for Truth or for Pastor Lukata or for someone else. And what we have to try to figure out is if we're looking at the same goal and if we're reaching for the same thing. And that is what becomes the basis of principled unity.
Thank you for that. Now we move on to our next question. So what advice would you give to educators to cultivate community leadership in the classroom?
Do the work of research and of community-based research. You know, when in the ministry as a preacher, we're taught a fancy seminary word called exegesis, and you're taught to exegete the text. You're taught to try to bring out, like exegete comes from the same root word that exit comes out. So you want to pull out or to exile. You want to pull out the meaning of a particular biblical passage. What did they mean when they said it in its original setting in the times of the Bible, so we can understand it then as a way of applying it to how we can understand it today? Well, I would say for a community based educator who is trying to cultivate community leadership in their classrooms, they need to exegete the community. You know, if you're teaching sociology, then you need to be engaged within those community organizations, within those neighborhoods, within those families and organizations that the people are shaping and defining, the places where people live, work, and play. You know, my son is a sociology major, and so you know, I was talking to him today and asked him if he's read this book that I gave him about a student who was a graduate student at the University of Chicago, and it's called Gang Leader for a Day. And he really wanted to understand the crack game. He wanted to understand how drugs were involved in not only bringing negative outcomes in the community, but why people were drawn to it and what did the underground economy look like. And so he went directly into the community and began to do community-based research where he talked to gang leaders, where he listened to gang leaders, where he paid attention to what was going on. He listened attentionally and intentionally, and he began to allow for those people who were a part of the gang community in Chicago to teach him so he could understand more fully the academic project that he was working on. And so, you know, it's important for educators as they seek to cultivate community leadership to go out into communities and to speak to people. I don't know, I didn't see you all nod your head when I mentioned the name Mukasa or Willie Ricks. I want you all to Google him. You can Google Willie Ricks, Mukasa Dada. You will see him hopefully periodically on campus at Morehouse. He was very active and had been active for years. When I came, he was a leader in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He was the person that introduced the term Black Power into the Civil Rights Movement, along with Stokely Carmichael back in the 1960s. And Mukasa, who was a Pan-Africanist, an organizer, a longtime human rights leader and revolutionary, I remember that there were professors that we had that would welcome him to come into the classroom and to teach us and to share his experiences and his ideas. And sometimes to teach, he would get there before they got there because Mukasa was on fire all the time. You ever hear somebody scream Uhuru or Hey African or freedom or something like on campus, it's probably him. He's a lot older. He's now, what, 30, almost 30 years older than when I was there, but he's still there. And he's still working and he's still struggling. And so, some of my best education, as I said before, there was a foundation and a context which came in the classroom, but I actually went and sat down with John Lewis and argued with him about nonviolence. I actually sat down with H. Rap Brown and asked him to teach me about what he meant when he said "burn, baby, burn," and he said, "You're not ready. You're not a revolutionary. You don't even know how to pray yet, and you don't have the discipline to pray. You don't have I got to sit down with the Connie Tucker, who was a leader of the Southern Organizing Committee for Economic and Social Justice, and Sandra Robertson, who was the Georgia Citizens Coalition on Hunger. And we had people who had been activists, like Hassan Crockett, who was in the political science department. And we had people like Dr. Hamid Taki, who was a professor at Morehouse, who had been who had been involved in political activities in Sierra Leone, and his brother was a political prisoner. I mean, there were all kinds there was exegetical work that was being done in community to bring community into the classroom and to put the classroom into community. So if you want to understand anything that you're studying, it is going to be best understood in whatever its context is. That's why when you take the natural sciences, you do biology and chemistry, they're going to give you labs. How in the world are you going to be doing sociology or political science or history and not have laboratories? And the laboratories are communities. So there are phenomenal community leaders in the city of Atlanta that are in the communities where you live. Go and find out who they are. Like I said, go and get what you need and encourage your professors, because be clear, professors are oftentimes reading books that were written by or about other people that may be in your community. So why would you not want to go to the original source if you have the ability to? I lived around the corner from Coretta Scott King. I went and worked at the King Center the summer after the Rodney King Rebellion in 1992. These are some of the, and like I said, and Coretta Scott King then, she was important, she was valuable, but she's almost like a demigod now. Like, you actually talked to Coretta Scott King? Yeah, I saw her take her trash out, on Griffin Street, in the morning. And I went and asked her why she didn't have her son Marty taking the trash out. Why are you taking this trash out by yourself, Mrs. King? I mean, the people who are around you right now, you never know. You never know what you're next to. And so pay attention.
Thank you a lot for, thank you. Each question that you answer just leaves me with a deep introspection of, how we can apply these lessons that you're sharing with us in real life.
Amen.
So thank you so much for this. So our next question: in this climate, there has been a lot of reactionary protests. So my question is, how do we move from reactionary demonstrations to organized protests? And I believe earlier you touched on, mobilization is getting the people out, and organizing is making sure the same problem that we had to get the people out for doesn't happen again. So I guess you could, again, touch on that, but also give a new response.
And one of the people who came and would speak at Morehouse while I was there, I remember him being in King Chapel, and I remember later being able to sit at his feet and listen to him, and I mentioned him several times tonight, is Stokely Carmichael, who later changed his name to Kwame Ture. He's a person connected to the guy I asked you to look up later, Willie Ricks. And Kwame Ture has passed, he's transitioned, but Willie Ricks is still here. But Kwame Ture, used to teach us, and he was the leader of a organization called the All African People's Revolutionary Party that was based in Africa. And he talked about the difference of having unity of action versus unity of thought. And that we have to get beyond simply having unity of action. And I say, reactionary protests are reactionary, but we don't need to be so quick to condemn them. I mean, there's reason for the reaction, and the important part of your question is, well, how do we move from reaction to organization? And I would say it goes back to even one of the earlier questions about the importance of education and even servant leadership within the context of education, that we have to teach people to know how. It's one thing to know, we have to teach people to know who the enemy is, to know what the enemy is, to know why the enemy is, and to know what you can actually do in order to overcome that which opposes you. And that requires political education, and it requires consciousness raising. And sometimes people's consciousness will begin to get raised in the protest. Good. Don't try to cut that out. Power above all, and Thomas Sankara said this, was a leader, young leader in Guinea-Bissau, not Guinea-Bissau, Burkina Faso. He said, power above all must be conquered by a conscious people. So the reactionary protests are sometimes the very thing that gets people fired up and awakens them that there's something wrong. And sometimes it's the first time that they feel like they have any power to change anything. Horace, I see behind you, you have a red, black, and green flag. And so, one of the things that I was taught when I was in Atlanta, and I was taught by those who were connected with the New African People's Organization, the Malcolm X grassroots movement, is they said that there's this threefold path. And you go through these different paths. There's a red stage, there's a green stage, and there's a black stage. The red stage is inspiration by emotion. And oftentimes when you're inspired by emotion, you have you participate in these reactionary demonstrations. You're mad, you're on fire, you know what you're against, you don't know what you're for, but you know what you're against, and your mind begins to be awakened, and you begin to shake off some of these ideas that you need to shake off in order for you to transition to that next stage when you can begin to reason what it is that you're for, that you can have understanding through reason, that green stage. And, but it involves a political consciousness and a political education. So when people are reacting and they're involved in this reactionary demonstrations, don't meet them with condemnation, meet them with a book, meet them with a video, meet them with a movie, meet them with a political education session, a community dialogue, a community discussion. Help to begin to put together the parts, help them to be able to figure out, okay, so that's what you're against. Let me tell you, when you threw that brick through the window, your enemy wasn't inside that store. But let me tell you where they are. And let's begin to work at how you can really target a real weapon that can actually reach your enemy, but not even just to reach your enemy. How do you reach your friends? Because we have to have both. That's the thing. It's one thing to focus and concentrate on who your enemy is. And I think it's important for us. I'm never one to say you shouldn't have enemies. I say if you don't have enemies, there's a problem. You're probably not doing something right. If you don't have any enemies, you need to earn some. And the way you earn enemies is by doing the things that you need to do. I guarantee you start doing the work of God, the devil shows up. So it's important for you to earn some enemies, but also know that God never leaves us just in the face of enemies. God also positions us and connects us with friends. And so we also have to build relationships and build alliances. And so, the type of organized protest, and it's not even just protest, the organized programs, the organized development, the organized organizations. We have to also do that too, because, and this is what I say to a lot of those who are involved in the Black Lives Matter movement. It's called a movement, but when I ask people, so what organization are you in? Well, I'm in the Black Lives Matter movement. You don't see my sign out in front. You don't see my T-shirt. Yeah, but what organization are you building? What organization can hold you accountable? What organization can you add your individual talents and gifts and resources to, so collectively you can do more together than you can do by yourselves? And many of our individuals who are involved at that red stage, they have to recognize that in order to move forward from red to green and ultimately to black, which is when you can sustain your commitment, comes as a result of building organizations. So political consciousness raising, education, organizational development and building, all of those are critical elements. And I challenge you, like I said, we had what they called a riot in 1992 with Rodney King. We called it a rebellion. But what was most important is that we went from, whether you called it riot or rebellion, to organization. And that's when Stacey Abrams, that's when Otis Moss III, that's when Lukata Mjumbe, that's when Kevin Donaldson's a graduate of Morehouse. That's when a number of brothers and sisters, Leland Brooks, Adisa Carter. I can name a long list of your brothers, our sisters at Spelman, Dr. Ramona Houston that taught at Morehouse, who was the SGA president at Clark Atlanta University. We built an organization. And that organization started children's breakfast programs in the university homes out of Providence Baptist Church. That organization began to build community self-defense programs. We closed down a store that was called the Bus Stop in West End that was selling drug paraphernalia out the front door and drugs out the back door in our community. That's the organization that challenged the Georgia state flag, removing the racist Confederate symbol off the flag, and people yelled and screamed at us and said that we were too radical and burning things never helped. But then a few years later, we got the flag changed. And so you don't see the Confederate battle flag on the Georgia state flag today because of what we did in 1992. And then we did it again in 1993. So I'd say consciousness, political organization, for the purpose of being able to have connected and sustained activity.
Thank you again for that response. So now we're going to finish up with our last question. So what are immediate steps that we can take in this climate to become future advocates, leaders, and change makers?
Well, I hope to say rewind everything we've been talking about for the last hour. I think I hope that's what I've been trying to communicate, in this conversation, that right now, the future is right now. The future isn't in 10 years, isn't in 20 years. The future is right now. You're my future. Because I was thinking about y'all and what you would do back when I came into Morehouse in 1989, when I had to drop out in 1992, when I came back and graduated in 2000. All of this is connected. And so right now, like I said, each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its own mission, fulfill it or betray it. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King said, we must use time creatively with the knowledge that the time is always ripe to do right. So right now, in this time, in this hour, don't wait. Those like there's a song with Kanye West. He says, I told God I'll be back in a second. Wait till I get my money right. No, you can't wait till you'll get your money right. The things that you do right now, more than you know, will shape not only whether or not you can get your money right, but whether or not your family and your community can get their money and their situation right. And so I would say, open yourself up to the possibility. Recognize that you are the ones that we have been waiting for. There's nobody else that we need to do it but you. So stand up. The ancestors are telling you, get up. What you waiting for? You know how much blood we shed, and how much work we did, and how much leveling of plains that we made for you. What are you waiting for? Right now. The future is right now. And so and become leaders in the movement. Don't think because you don't know everything right now that you cannot lead. Don't think because you don't have your degree yet that you don't know enough. Commit yourself to know it, to learn it, to access it, and know that the best education and training that you're going to get is in real time, in real places, amongst real people. So commit yourself to find those real people. Commit yourself to go to those real places and recognize that the real time is right now. That's all that I could add to all of what we've talked about thus far.
Thank you, Reverend Lukata, for those amazing responses and advice that you give to us for, future leaders or future aspiring leaders and advocates. So really appreciate you for coming out and sharing that.
Thank you, Reverend Lukata. That was really insightful. Very, your very last point about if not the point I connected with, if not you, then who? If not now, then when? So I really appreciate you just instilling that power and speaking power into us and all those listening. I hope that we can still engage with you so that we can, you can use us as a tool and we can use you just to expand all the work that we're doing, especially with such an accomplished elder. So I appreciate you for that. Thank you to the Morehouse Center for Excellence in Education for hosting this event. There really would be none of this without them. So I really appreciate you guys too. And that's all I have. So again, Reverend Lukata, thank you so much for just taking the time and speaking power this whole time.
Thank you.